Yesterday, power went out across parts of Europe, in Spain, Portugal, and a small part of France, I believe in the Basque region. I'm not an expert on European geography for the most part, but this is isolated largely to Western Europe. We don't know what happened. Now, they're saying it's a strange atmospheric phenomenon that caused the power to go out, and they are ruling out a cyber attack. However, despite this, we're still hearing reports that not only is a cyber attack still a real potential, with the escalation of conflicts happening around the world, there are a lot of threat actors, as it were, who may actually try to strike at NATO resources wherever they can. Why Spain? Nobody knows for sure. Now, last week, it was reported that there was a Russian cyber attack. Days ago, it was reported there was an attack on Iran, a cyber attack. And we in the United States have been attacked by China basically every day for 20 years. They're constantly trying to break into our systems for data. Worse, our industrial control systems. These are the mechanisms by which we control our electrical grid, water pumps, chemical facilities, etc. But right now, strangely, it's not. It's tough for me because it's not really the kind of story that I go after because it seems so outrageous. But we are getting this report, not just from express.co.uk, but also The Guardian, about a potential solar storm worse than Chernobyl, a warning after the Spain and Portugal outages. Was this actually caused by a weather phenomenon? Maybe a weakening of the magnetosphere, which allowed solar radiation, space particles to blast our electrical grid, shutting it down? Maybe. NASA's been investigating a dent in the magnetosphere for some time, but I'm not an expert. So we will be bringing in one of the experts, if not the expert, Ben Davidson, later on to break down for us what this may have been. He did a big stream on what happened in Europe, but there is a concern now. And this, my friends, is mainstream. When you talk about things like a solar storm worse than Chernobyl that could knock out the grid and cause nuclear meltdowns, they say that you're a conspiracy theorist, you're blackpilling. But then The Guardian and Express published this story both just one day, on the same day, actually, as this disaster. So we're going to break this down and go through what exactly this could mean and what the real threat of war may be before jumping into that interview with Ben Davidson, who's going to break down some of the science for us and what we may be about to experience. Now, before we get started, of course, shout outs to Steven Crowder and the Mug Club for shouting us out. We're big fans. Really do appreciate it. This is the Rumble morning lineup, noon hour. I am Tim Pool, your host. You can follow me on X and Instagram at Timcast. Before we get started, my friends, make sure you head over to castbrew.com and buy some delicious Cast Brew coffee. If you head over to our ground section, we got a bunch of different varieties. We got Alex Stein's Primetime Grind. We got 2 weeks till Christmas gingerbread, Luck of the Seamus Irish Cream, Misty Mountains. Everybody's favorite, though, is the low acidity Ian's Graphene Dream. Sells like hotcakes. And I will stress, we are about to sell out of Alex Stein's Primetime Grind. 2 times caffeine. There's less than 100 bags left, I believe. And once it's gone forever. Don't forget to also go to timcast.com, click join us, get in our Discord server. The Culture War live event will be Saturday, where you, as members of our Discord, can join the debate stage and debate on the show with various personalities on these issues. On Saturday, it's going to be the deportation of Kilmar Abrego Garcia and the legalities and issues surrounding due process and whether or not Donald Trump can and should be doing this. And we've got, I believe, around 15 to 17 submissions already from you, our members. So again, timcast.com. Join us. But don't forget to smash that like button, share the show, subscribe, tell everybody you know about the show. Let's read the story from express.co.uk. Solar storm worse than Chernobyl. A warning after Spain and Portugal outages. Experts claim there is a possibility that solar storms will hit more frequently now than in the past. They go to mention the Chernobyl disaster. It took place April 26, 1986, a nuclear accident in Ukraine that occurred as a result of a reactor explosion that led to vast amounts of radioactive material being thrown into the environment. The impacts were severe and it remains the worst nuclear disaster in history. Now, scientists suspect that solar storms powerful enough to collapse portions of modern power grids for months may hit the Earth more often than once in a century, according to The Guardian. And this is where we're currently at. How a solar storm could lead to a U.S. nuclear disaster worse than Chernobyl. And in fact, they go on to mention solar storms, these fears, and why it's coming up. Now, I have a few questions. Why publish this story just before this grid goes down? Did anybody know about it? Probably not. But it is an interesting coincidence. There has been speculation for some time. We have these stories from NASA, mind you. This is from 2023. Scientists are getting kind of anxious about a pothole in space, indeed. And this has been known about for a long time. So I wonder, when people start popping up with these narratives saying, hey guys, scientists, researchers, space weather experts are warning that the magnetosphere of Earth, which is basically a force field that repels space particles, solar wind, etc., there's a hole in it. It's getting weaker. Something may be coming. And then a day after this story is published, you get a power outage that they are saying is the result of induced atmospheric vibration. People start to wonder. Now, we don't know for sure because, again, there are still people who believe it may be a cyber attack. They are ruling this out. The other explanation is that around the same time, just the day before, Spain announced that they were going totally green energy. Solar panels would power everything. Not literally all solar panels. And then the grid went down. Perhaps this narrative of solar storms or cyber attacks is to cover up policy failures from crackpot leftist politicians that have been arguing for renewable energies which cannot sustain a system. Hey, look, I'm a big fan of renewables, my friends. I like the idea, but we don't call them renewables. We call them alternative. Why? They don't largely get used for something as grandiose as powering an entire grid for a nation. It requires more energy to produce them than they will output. Unfortunately for us, fossil fuels, still the best energy return on energy invested, though nuclear can rival this. Maybe fusion energy will come soon. But these politicians in Spain and in Europe and even in the US have been bragging and demanding for these systems. Could it be that actually what happened in Spain is not a solar disaster, not the pending end of the world, not a Russian threat, but their own failures smacking them in the face, and then once again, they want to cover this up? Perhaps. With the Daily Mail reporting, could renewable energy be to blame for a huge Spain blackout? How outage struck days after the country's grid ran entirely on green power for the first time. Okay. I'm going to lean towards, that may be the case. But let's do this. First, I want to give you the context around what happened in Spain. They are ruling out a cyber attack, but what are they claiming happened? We have this report from the BBC. Spain rules out cyber attack, but what could have caused the power cut? The Spanish grid operator has ruled out a cyber attack as the cause of a massive power cut that crippled Spain, Portugal, and parts of France. Red Electrica's operations director, Eduardo Prieto, said preliminary findings suggest there was no kind of interference of the control systems to imply an attack, echoing Portuguese Prime Minister Luis Montenegro the day before. But the exact reason behind the cut is still unclear. The grid operator said on Tuesday they cannot draw conclusions until they get concrete data. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said investigators were trying to pinpoint the cause and then would take all necessary measures to ensure that this does not happen again. Information is trickling out about what happened at the time of the cut, leading to theories about what could have caused it. Experts told the BBC it was likely caused by several failures. Sanchez on Monday said 15 gigawatts of power, the equivalent of 60% of demand at that time, was suddenly lost from the system in just 5 seconds. Mr. Prieto said during a news conference on Tuesday that there were 2 disconnection events barely a second apart in the southwest of Spain, where there is substantial solar power generation. Indeed. Guys, as much as we may want to believe that there is a big apocalyptic event, I know it's funny, like who would want to believe it's going to happen? It does sound a lot like policy failures and psychotic ideology are destroying these countries, and they don't want to admit it. But hold on, let's read more. They go on to say, one issue that the Spanish grid operator may have been referring to was when power companies identify a mismatch of supply and demand for electricity that could lead to instability and disconnect temporarily in order to protect systems. However, Sanchez later said the power cut was not a problem of excessive renewables. He said there was not a failure of coverage, meaning supply, and there was a relatively low demand for electricity that was quite normal in the days running up to the crisis. So what happened? It's unclear.
especially as many systems fail in electricity supply quite frequently. Not only renewables and outages of this scale happen, not only renewables and outages of this scale happen somewhere in the world around once a year on average. The mismatch between supply and demand of electricity can change the frequency of the electricity grid, which is 50 hertz in Europe and the UK. If that frequency changes out of a narrow range, it could lead to damage to equipment. When a big company detects that the frequency is moving out of their tolerance, they can go offline to protect equipment. Okay, fine. But why? Why wouldn't they just say that? Is it because they don't want to admit it? They don't want to admit they've made a mistake? Some guy pressed the wrong button? Maybe. Was it linked to a rare atmospheric event? The message in Portuguese said that due to an extreme temperature variations in the interior of Spain, there were anomalous oscillations in the very high voltage lines, a phenomenon known as induced atmospheric vibration. These oscillations cause synchronization failures between electrical systems, leading to successive disturbances across the interconnected European network. Live Science, or is it Live Science? I don't know. It's probably Live Science, says, what is induced atmospheric vibration? And did it really cause power outages across Spain and Portugal? They say the exact cause of the blackout remains unclear. Though reps of Portugal's electricity network, this is what we get. They said it was induced atmospheric vibrations, synchronization failures. The blackout that hit the entire territory of the mainland Portugal today is the result of a significant voltage fluctuation in the Spanish grid at a time when Portugal was importing energy from Spain. With this fluctuation, the control and protection systems of the Portuguese power plants, as expected in a situation with this configuration, shut down, causing the blackout. They're going to say if these conditions had been in place, they may have triggered abnormal oscillations in very high voltage lines. Although investigations are ongoing, some early media reports are mentioning a phenomenon known as induced atmospheric vibration linked to unusual atmospheric conditions, including rapid temperature variations and resulting wind patterns. All right, I can already tell you what a lot of people on the left are going to say. They're going to say climate change. That proves it. Because anything that ever happens at any point, any time related to weather is going to be global warming. And then when you point out that actually it was a phenomenon of it getting colder, they say, we mean climate change, not global warming. And I say, pick one. So long as Barack Obama is going to complain about climate change and global warming and then buy waterfront property that will be underwater in 20 some odd years, according to their arguments, I'm just not going to believe him. I got to be honest. I'm greatly concerned about pollution. I don't think we should be polluting the planet. But there are many people who believe that what we're witnessing and experiencing in terms of atmospheric changes and climate changes, these are largely related to cycles of the earth and the sun and not anything man has done. But hey, far be it from me to tell you exactly what. I don't know. They're going to mention protection systems are designed to automatically disconnect affected power lines in response to such faults. So it's actually quite simple. They're basically saying that the temperature fluctuated rapidly in Spain. This caused an issue with the Spanish grid operator that triggered emergency breakers, which shut the system down. Boring, I guess. The question then is, what's causing these temperature-driven power surges? They mentioned a 12-hour blackout across much of Italy in 2003 was triggered by an issue with a hydroelectric power line between Italy and Switzerland. And a 2006 temperature-driven power surge in Germany caused power cuts across France, Italy, Spain, and Belgium, and even Morocco. One of the largest blackouts in history occurred in India in 2012, affecting over 600 million people. All of Portugal and 99% of Spain now have electricity, and authorities are working to figure out the true cause of the incident to stop it from happening again. Now, interestingly, this story from The Guardian gains traction because just the day before this grid goes down, there was a warning about solar storms knocking out our electrical grid, resulting in when the power goes down, the cooling systems fail, and you get a reactor meltdown. Now that's something. This article comes out the day before. And I'm not suggesting they knew in advance or anything. I'm saying we usually just call that a warning, right? If a bunch of experts come out, I'm not saying this is a bunch, but let's just say a bunch of scientists come out and say, hey, we're concerned that the data we show is indicative of a coming earthquake in this particular area. Everybody should be warned. And then a day later, the earthquake happens. It's just, that's predictive science. This is worrying. Fears of solar storms becoming more frequent, knocking out power grids, and then a day later, grid goes down due to atmospheric conditions. I think a rational person might say, these are connected. Here's a story from The Guardian. On 14th of May, it's British, by the way, 1921, a powerful solar storm called the New York Railroad Storm caused the northern lights to illuminate New York City's night sky. On Broadway, crowds lingered, enjoying flaring skies that remained undimmed by city lights. The following morning, excess electrical currents shut down the New York Central Railroad signal and switching system in Manhattan, stopping trains. A fire broke out in a railroad control tower that was located at Park and 57th. Smoke filled the air. Along a stretch of Park Avenue, residents were coughing and choking from the suffocating vapors which spread for blocks. When a solar storm's electrically charged particles envelop Earth, they cause geomagnetic storms that generate electric fields in the ground, inducing electric currents in power grids. Solar storms as intense as the 1921 superstorm have the potential to cause a nightmare scenario in which modern power grids, communication systems, and other infrastructures collapse for months. Such a collapse of power grids would likely also lead to nuclear power plant accidents, whose radioactive emissions would aggravate the overall catastrophe. Scientists estimate that solar storms powerful enough to collapse portions of modern power grids for months may hit Earth more often than once in a century. In July of 2012, a solar superstorm estimated to have been more intense than the New York Railroad Storm crossed Earth's orbit, missing the planet by 1 week's time. The East Coast states, Upper Midwest and Pacific Northwest have geological characteristics, not predominant in other regions of the U.S., that increase the vulnerability of power grid infrastructures to solar systems. Unfortunately, the majority of commercial nuclear power plants in the U.S. are located in the East Coast states and the Upper Midwest, two of the U.S. regions that are most vulnerable to solar storm-induced blackouts. In a months-long blackout, nuclear plants would lose their supply of off-site electricity, which is necessary for their safe operation. Emergency diesel generators, which provide backup electricity, are designed to power cooling pumps for a number of days, not months. No nuclear plant in the U.S. has ever lost off-site electricity for longer than a week. In 2012, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission stated that an extreme solar storm could collapse power grids and potentially lead to reactor core damage at multiple nuclear power plants. Okay, so what's going on with this NASA story? Anxious about a pothole in space, a dent in the magnetosphere, which keeps us shielded from solar wind. Maybe. Did you guys know that Puerto Rico also had a major power outage? This story from the AP, April 21st, 2025, wasn't as big of a story. They say that Puerto Rico's governor on Monday urged people to moderate their energy consumption as she warned the island has no additional power generation capability to fall back on days after a massive blackout hit the U.S. territory. Here's what I'm getting to. It may actually be. When we see these stories about solar storms, yes, we should be concerned about solar storms. Yes, they are claiming atmospheric conditions did this. While they've ruled out cyberattack, I think one thing we can say is cyberattack threats are real. They're happening all the time. This is why we do not want to be involved in wars overseas. And in the event we get hit by a cyberattack on industrial control systems to cut the power, the ramifications would be the same. If a solar storm would knock out a power plant and cause a nuclear meltdown, cyberattack could do the exact same thing. In fact, a solar storm is it happens, right? Let's say a solar storm happens, you get hit by it, repairs begin immediately. Contingency efforts begin immediately, and we're resourceful. We can probably mitigate that. But what if it was a cyber attack that struck at our critical infrastructure? Let's say we actually decide to go full-scale war in Ukraine with Russia. NATO gets involved directly. Russia's threatening nuclear retaliatory strikes. That's grandiose. What could they really do? Sustained industrial control system shutdown. When they shut down the grid or other industrial control systems, try as we might to mitigate it, we will be actively working against our enemies who are trying to shut it down all the same. So that's the point. If a solar storm hits, it's a one-off. We can fix it. If Russia, China, Iran, or any adversary of the U.S., a terror group or whatever, seeks to shut down the grid, they can actually launch a prolonged and sustained attack against our grid, making it much harder to mitigate and restore power. And power is just one function. Theoretically, they could go into any industrial control system, nuclear power plants especially, and they could directly screw up our cooling systems, causing meltdowns. It is pretty worrying. Lifestyle from it's Marca's lifestyle section. The reason behind the European blackout, the power cut, could be caused by a cyber attack. Now, I know we've already said that we don't know for sure. This has been the speculation. They reported that there is, as of yet, no official answer, but theories are beginning to emerge, including the most conspiratorial ones. I'm going to pause you right there. That ain't no conspiracy. That's ridiculous. The U.S. and NATO countries are actively engaged in a war with Russia. Now, they're not boots on the ground formally, but there are veteran private volunteers from Western nations fighting in Ukraine with Western weapons and Western intelligence directed by Western special forces. So, yeah, Russia has a real reason to strike. More importantly, from DW, Dutch intelligence reports Russian cyber attack. The Dutch military intelligence agency has warned about growing attacks from Russia in an effort to destabilize society. The intelligence report also cited threats from China and its support for Moscow. This story dropped April 22nd, 1 week before it had already been reported that Russia, possibly China, were engaged in attacks against us. Why wouldn't they be? We are at war. They want to destabilize our economies and make it difficult for us to support Ukraine. Personally, I think this is a risk that they've never spelled out the benefits of. Why is the U.S. involved in a conflict in Ukraine? And Trump is certainly working hard to put an end to this war. Vladimir Putin did call for a ceasefire, but it's delayed. And he did, or I should say, the Russians did threaten nuclear retaliation against NATO nations. What they're not saying is, behind the scenes, they're attacking us. Russian hackers targeted a Dutch public facility last year, the Dutch Military Intelligence Agency and Security Service, MIVD, reported on Tuesday. The target was the digital control system of an undisclosed Dutch public facility in the first known Russian attack on the Netherlands' critical infrastructure. The MIVD said in its annual report. The report reviewed other cyber attacks against European allies of Ukraine amid the ongoing war. Why was the Netherlands targeted? Well, it's an interesting country. They say it's an interesting target country for Moscow due to its continued support for Ukraine. Last week, Dutch Defense Minister Ruben Brekelmans announced 150 million euro for Ukraine's air defense systems. Quote, "We see the Russian threat against Europe is increasing, including after a possible end to the war against Ukraine." Resync said that last year's attack against the public service aimed to gain control of the system, adding that it was thwarted. As far as is known, this is the first time that such a sabotage attack has been carried out against such a digital control system in the Netherlands, literally targeting industrial control systems. This is what we're worried about. Let me stress it again for you guys. A week prior, we got word that there was an industrial control systems hack against the Netherlands, specifically for their support for Ukraine. Now the power goes out a week later. I think it's silly to rule out cyber attack. That's what they're claiming maybe. Maybe we're dealing with space phenomenon. My friends, honestly, who knows? I just think it's interesting timing, to say the least. They're going to say the agency also warned against Russian units mapping infrastructure and conducting acts of sabotage in the North Sea, which lies between the UK and continental Europe. Russia's sabotage activities in the bed of water targets internet cables, water, and energy supplies, the Dutch agency said. The report also reiterated that China continues to pose a serious threat to Europe through its backing of Moscow, as well as separate cyber espionage activities. I think this is the real threat. I really do. You know, Russia threatening NATO with revenge nuclear strikes, that's saber rattling. That's meant to shock regular people who don't really pay attention to news all that much. It's headline grabbing. They threaten these things in their press because it's what people know. It's devastating, but it's not the principal means by which they're actually going to carry an attack, in my opinion. If Russia carries out a cyber attack in Spain, shutting down their power grid, who knows? In fact, even if they did it, if they covered their tracks well enough, they might just say it was an oopsie daisy. We don't know. Now, all that really matters is what do powerful people believe? And that's the terrifying reality that we have here. You see, if Russia were or were not to launch an attack, but something devastating happens, if people in power want this to be the cause, they'll do it. That's how false flags work. Let's say the West, NATO, wanted to escalate the conflict in Ukraine. They need only say, this was Russia. You can't prove us wrong. It's unfalsifiable. In which case, they can drag us into the war whenever they want. Interestingly, however, though, the narrative around solar storms and climate change and all of these things has been persistent. As I already mentioned with the story about NASA tracking this dent in the magnetosphere. So, my friends, as we gear up to bring in Ben Davidson and go over exactly what's going on, I'm gonna wrap up the intro segment for this show before we go to the interview. So smash that like button, share the show with everyone you know. You can follow me on X and Instagram at Timcast. And for everybody else, stay tuned. We're going to have that interview in just a minute.